It's the bat signal, sir.
Yes, Alfred. No doubt the commissioner's already calling.
Oh, mercy alive. Why, you'd think you were Batman and Robin rushing out like that.
We were just going fishing, Aunt Harriet.
At this hour? Land's sake. You two sure do fish a lot.
We find it's a great way to relax from the pressures of being a millionaire playboy and his teenage ward.
Indeed. Now, if you excuse us, Aunt Harriet.
Can you believe the lengths those two go to keep their little secret?
Secret, ma'am?
Why, Alfred, you really don't see it?
No, I do not. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe the upstairs doorknobs need polishing. Good day, madam.
No need to explain, Commissioner. We saw the whole sordid affair. Those criminals will be brought to justice, or I'll know the reason why. We're on our way.
Hurry, Caped Crusader. Whoever you may be under that cowl of yours, you paladin of virtue, you're our only hope.
To the Batcave.
Welcome back, citizens, to an all-new episode of the Batcave podcast. It's your old bat chum, John S. Drew here, and I am joined for another edition of From the Files of the Batcomputer by the master of the 13th dimension himself, Mr. Dan Greenfield. Hey, Dan.
I guess I've been upgraded to master now. I'm not sure that, but thank you very much for the honorary title, I guess. Yeah, hey, John. We have a special guest with us today as well. I guess, would you like to tell the folks who we have with us?
Well, we've got with us here, because you've been hearing us talking about the Batman 66 cartoons that DT, or maybe I shouldn't say cartoons. I know some people get a little put off by that. Animated features of recent times here, the Return of the Caped Crusaders and Batman versus Two-Face. And we did our reviews. We did our runs of the interviews with a number of the people involved in the production of both Adam West last year and this year Burt Ward and William Shatner and a number of the producers. And we've got one of the producers here with us in the Batcave this evening. I'd like to welcome to the Batcave podcast, Mr. James Tucker, supervising producer of both movies. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Hey, James.
To be out there. Hello.
Now,
Dan and John.
James, now, let me ask you this first off to get things rolling here, because I've got to admit, I love the movies. Love them both. I mean, I love all the details that you guys put into it, showing your love for the 66 series. But I got to ask, as the guy still on the side, like, how did this all come about? What made you think, considering how DC Comics has been, you know, Batman is the Dark Knight, hey, let's take a step back and let's revisit the 66 series?
Well, first of all, it wasn't my idea. Not that, I mean, everyone at Warner's, I've been here 20 plus years, everyone here knew, who's been here that long or even vaguely knows me, knows that, you know, Batman 66 has always been my sweet spot. And, you know, joining Warner Animation in the 90s, coming out after BTAS had set the world on fire. And, you know, that was the furthest thing away from anything that Warner Animation was going to be doing when I started here, anything to do with Adam West, although, you know, they had made nice with him and had him as the Grey Ghost on BTAS and all that. But
BTAS being Batman the Animated Series.
Yes, I'm sorry. I assume anyone listening to this knows what that means. But but yeah, you know, I mean, and if, you know, I don't know if younger people may remember, but you know, anything to do with Adam West was verboten for probably 2 decades at least, I would think, as far as the comic book fandom and the hip, cool kids and who are into Batman and all that. Well, I never, excuse my French, is that a, well, anyway, and all that stuff. I'll let you edit out the bleep me out. But you know, within my heart, I was a closet Adam West fan. Although I quickly knew once I got around people that even fans, people who worked on BTAS, they loved Adam West. It just wasn't cool to love Adam West back in the 90s. But anyway, long story short, which is too late, I think what happened was the Blu-rays of the series finally, the Lost Ark of the Covenant came out of the 66 series, and, it made money. And suddenly it's like, oh, there's there's gold in them there hills. Let's go back to this, while we can. I mean, I have to say also, I think, I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but I'd like to think that doing Batman the Brave and the Bold kind of, greased the wheel a little bit, right, to kind of have people reassess the 66 series a little more generously, rather than just have that default hate against it that was so prevalent. It got really tiresome, actually. But I defended Adam West, the Adam West show all my life, pretty much, to anyone who's willing to listen. So, when I wanted to embrace that kind of stuff in Brave and the Bold, and, it was relatively successful in that it opened it up to a lot of people, exposed a lot of people to that side of Batman that weren't familiar with it or didn't know they could even like that side of Batman, the lighter side. So, I don't know if it was just the zeitgeist where all that stuff started happening at the same time, and next thing we know, they're asking, let's try and do this. Let's do animated. Let's try to get some more Batman out of Adam West, Right. And so I was I was down for it, and my boss Sam Register just asked me. I don't even know if he got finished the sentence, and before I said yes, of course. And then we sat down with Adam West, had him come in with his manager, and just discussed it with him, and he was really great, really excited, had a lot of ideas, and it just went from there. And it just kind of, once that all started, it just kind of was a snowball. It happened very fast and very, that was like my dream gig, and all of a sudden it was happening, and there was no time to really prepare for it. I was in the middle of doing, other movies for Warner, so I kind of had to just make time to do it. So it was really crazy.
James, was that the first time you had met Adam West, or had you met him under other circumstances?
No, I'd worked with him for the first time on Chill of the Night of Batman Brave and the Bold episode, but he actually had to do that on phone. He wasn't actually in town. So then I had to cast him again in an episode just so I could meet him. So I cast him as Batman's prototype robot in an episode called Plague of the Prototypes. And he actually came in, and what was so great was that normally we recorded with a group of people, and he couldn't make that session, so he had to come in by himself and do it. So it was just, me, him, Andrea Romano, the engineer. It was very much one-on-one, and I was like meeting your hero is like, oh my gosh. It was hard to even give him direction or say, do it like this. Or the only regret on that show is that there was a perfect opportunity to have him say, some days you just can't get rid of a bomb, because there's actually a plot point in the actual episode, and I totally missed it. Totally missed it. That was crazy. But he was great. I don't know if anyone I'm sure either you guys had met Adam or people who've listened to it, and he always treated people. He was perfect. He was exactly what you would have wanted Adam West to be like when you met him, at least in my experience and what I saw of other people dealing with him. He's just so cool, just so nice is a underrated word, but for him, it's just like that's who he was. So it was great. It was very rewarding. And so then to get him to come back and be Batman was such an honor.
Now, you co-wrote both scripts with Michael Jelenic, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you wrote them at the same time? Can you tell us a little bit about when you actually started working on this? How this all kind of came together from that standpoint?
Well, I will say we did these. I mean, I had other movies I was working on. Michael was neck deep in Titans Go, but it was a project we both wanted to work on, and I really enjoyed working with Michael on Brave and the Bold and in Legion of Superheroes second season, and I thought we worked really well together. But the way we did these scripts, the first script for Return, I think he did the heavy lifting of just beating it out, plotting it, and putting in the scenes. And then the way we work is he'll generate the rough structure of the script and like placeholder dialogue, and then he would basically send it to me to kind of 66 it up a little bit, since I'm quite a bit older than him. No, not quite a bit, but he'd say that. But I lived the show. He was really just kind of he knew the show, but he's just he's more 80s than I am as far as generational. So anyway, I would kind of do a pass and then send it back to him, and he'd kind of rearrange things, and so we'd do a back and forth basically until we came up with the final beat and the final finished script, and then you get notes and then you adjust. And the second script, Batman versus Two-Face, we kind of flipped it, where I did a lot of the structural stuff, a lot of the plotting, and then send it back to him, and then we'd go back and forth and get notes and stuff. And so it was very collaborative, I mean, I would say that probably the more he always handled the heart of the story, and I think I tended to like to go in for the one-liners and the things that made it more 66-ish.
Now you mentioned about generationally and how you lived the series and all of that. Because I actually have some questions about how much of that ended up in the scripts themselves. So let's take it one step backward. How did you discover the show to begin with? As John likes to call it, were you a first-generation syndication baby, or did you watch it when it was on in the 60s? Tell us a little bit about how you discovered it and grew up with the show.
Well, I have a feeling I must have been a first-generation syndication, like the week after it got canceled and went on, and then because I can't imagine my parents would have knowingly sat and watched that show.
Where did you grow up?
And I grew up in Gary, Indiana,
okay.
in the was born in the late 60s, mid to late 60s. I'll be vague, but that's not that vague anymore. I'm old.
You're pretty much the same age as we are, so you don't have to be that vague. Yeah.
And so my first seeing it must have been coming home after school. I was a bit of a latchkey kid, so I probably had the TV all to myself, and I'm the oldest, so I probably had control of the TV. And I'm sure I saw it at like 3 p.m. after school or something. So that must have been it. I can't remember if I actually saw the Filmation series cartoon first, and then saw the live action. It's all kind of a blur. All I know is I always say this about Batman: no matter what version you see, he's one of those characters that no matter what version you see, something will, if you're prone to it, something will go off in your head like a landmine, and you are hooked. And it doesn't matter, because Batman fans are used to getting in arguments over which is the definitive version, and it's always whatever one was on when they first saw him.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, if I were like 80 years old, then it'd be the old movie serials or something, I guess. But although I doubt that. I don't know how anyone could love those, but I don't know. They're hard going. But
it's true. You could watch them in small snippets, but trying to watch them all the way through is very difficult. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So then when you were going to the script, then what were some of the things that you really wanted to make sure got in there, whether it was in the first movie or the second movie?
Well, the first movie, I mean, we kind of knew going in we were going to get two shots, but we couldn't really think that way as far as structuring the movie, so we just dove into that first movie. And I think we agreed early on that because it was the first movie, it was the return, we kind of wanted to give the greatest hits of Batman and also make it more, and this is probably a lot of Michael's influences, making it more meta, meaning it wasn't just good enough to just do a story that would be taking place in the 66 world. It had to be a story that was about a bigger theme. It was about Batman 66 place in Batman fandom, and so it was it wasn't just a story. It was doing some heavy lifting for some other reasons that we wanted to have a bigger statement about Batman, and particularly about Adam West's version. So it kind of plays to me like a greatest hits or like a series of vignettes about the show, referencing the show a little bit. Yeah, there's a story, but it's a very, it's a very slim, straightforward story, and in some ways it kind of replicates the movie, the 66 movie a little bit with the villains and stuff, but that's kind of, we just went in thinking, well, we want to celebrate the series first, and then we'll worry about actually doing a story. Yeah, which is kind of where the part two came, the Batman versus Two-Face was more of just a story that could have happened in the 66 world.
Now, when it came to the Batman 66 series, I remember with the DC Comics that came out, there were certain elements that just they couldn't touch. And for some fans, that sort of put them off and said, well, then it's really not Batman 66. Now,
yeah, it put me off, too, until I had to do this movie, these movies. And then I went, oh, that's what was going on.
Now, what was there anything like specifically spelled out to you? I mean, obviously we didn't see Batgirl, we didn't see the window climbing scene, but were there things that were spelled out to you that's like, yeah, no, you can't touch that because, whatever.
Well, it was a slow rollout of being spelled out, meaning, and everyone who was involved in the project, I'm talking about lawyers, people, all the people who made this deal happen and was trying to figure it out, they're talking to people who are diehard fans of the show, who know the show inside and out. And so often we were instructed that we could not replicate the show, directly. We had to. So luckily for me, the only way I really could justify any of these changes was to find a comic book precedent, meaning, if Commissioner Gordon couldn't look like Neil Hamilton, well then I could make him look like what Commissioner Gordon looked like in the comics at the time, or same with Alfred, we had to juggle things because certain likenesses weren't available to us. We couldn't really, in a way, I'm glad it happened that way because it would have been very easy to just try to replicate the show straight. And I think ultimately that might have been boring to some people. It might have been boring even to us, ultimately, just trying to replicate something that you really can't replicate, But a lot of the little finicky details that we weren't allowed to do, most people didn't even notice, I mean, it came down to how many buttons were on the sofa in the Wayne living room. I mean, that's how...
No kidding.
That's how minute the notes could get. I mean, I'm not kidding. It was crazy. And it was kind of it made it really difficult because you couldn't just... All this wealth of knowledge from having watched that show on a loop ever since I was 6 years old, a lot of it I could not, reference. I couldn't just automatically defer to what I knew to be the show. I had to find... So what we basically had to do was go to the source material, the same source material that the show drew on, and that we draw on for all of our series, actually. Any Batman show will have some reference to things that happened in the comics before that 66 show. I mean, this is the grandfather clock being the interest of the Batcave versus, the bookcase with the poles. I mean, in our movie, we combined those two ideas because we literally weren't allowed to just have a bookcase open up to show the poles. We had to, we had to negotiate what was ours as far as being our DC's and what existed in Batman before the series. And so it became a lot of it was just touchy, but I think we accomplished something that evoked the series without literally being a carbon copy of it.
Well, on that point, even if you felt like you were the only one who got the joke, what was in either of the movies, what was one or two things that you were like, man, I'm so glad I got that in? And then what are one or two things you're like, man, I wish I could have gotten that in?
I don't know if there was anything, because again, I couldn't be. I mean, I think honoring the fact that there were 3 different Catwomen in the franchise.
3 Catwomen?
Is that so bad?
Of course it is. Now he has to pick just one. Perhaps not.
There's inside jokes in there that a casual, even someone who just watched the show casually would not get, that I was glad we were able to make nods to. And even in the second movie, getting Lee Merriweather, her character, to end up in a Catwoman outfit, spoilers. Just stuff like that. Just stuff that diehard fans might know a little more about, although I never realized that when Lee Merriweather was Catwoman, she did not have the necklace on until someone mentioned it online recently, and I was like, wait a minute. I had it was something that I went, well, of course she didn't, in hindsight, but it was one of those things I never consciously noticed in all the times I watched that movie. But anyway.
That's really funny because when we did our review episode of it, the one thing I mentioned, I said that was perfect, except I wish that Julie Newmar said, "I'm taking the necklace with me."
Oh, maybe that's where I heard it. Maybe I probably heard it on that podcast. But it's never, sometimes you're so close to something that there's a lot of things you can miss. And there's several things just making these 2 movies that and plus with the Blu-rays out, and now you can see all kinds of little details that you never really wanted to see. Little sweat stains and things like that. But
no, you really can. It's true.
I don't know. I don't think there's anything I don't feel like we left money on the table if it was money we could actually put in the movie, if to use a weird analogy.
Well, I know that there's only so many things that you can say about it, but can you shed a little bit of light about the absence of Batgirl? Because that was a question that a lot of fans had, and there were a lot of assumptions made. And I know that there are only so many things that you can discuss, but what can you tell us about that situation?
Well, all I know was I was one of the people who kept bringing it up, and it just seemed like it was getting deflected, as far as, and then I also knew we were going to do a second movie, so I thought, I could justify it by saying, oh, well, we'll try to get her into the second movie. Now, this is before I knew anything about, her being, I assume, ill, because she passed away either right before we announced we were going to do it, and usually when we announce we're going to do something, we've been doing it for probably 2 or 3 months. We've already started the process. So anyway, we went into it, and I'm thinking, well, we should try to get her in it. And no one would say, and I don't know if the people involved who represented her or who were connected to the, making all the deals knew that she was in poor health or whatever. I don't know any of that. But I know that once she passed, that kind of took it off of there was no way for me to justify trying to do it then, because I don't, it felt wrong to recast or try to work her into it if, having her so recently passing away, it just felt weird. The other actors who had to be, the villains who we needed to get, voice actors to do, that was a different thing, but it just felt weird to me. And I don't think that was ever part of the plan at first, because the first movie was really just about Batman 66 in general, just an overview. But so I didn't really know what was going on with Yvonne Craig specifically, and then we all learned that she passed away. So it came a moot point as far as the movies were, as far as I was concerned with the movies.
I was curious because, now you've done these 2 movies, and you were talking about, like, having Adam West, but you also got to work with another 60s icon in William Shatner. And I was just curious, because I know he's talked about the process of bringing Two-Face, or at least his take on it and such. And I'm wondering, like, how the give and take there worked with him. How much of that was his doing? Because, honestly, that whole scene there towards the end, when he transforms into Two-Face and he's struggling, is just so brilliant.
William Shatner is just, to say he's an icon and all that, but people forget he's really a well-trained actor, meaning, before Captain Kirk, he did a lot of, television and stuff, and he regularly played, twisted individuals and mentally, strange people, I put it that way. He played all kinds of different kinds of characters. And so, he came wanting to play and explore, and, he was interested in trying to make sure that Harvey and Two-Face's voices were very different. And he played around with a lot of different voices before we got it, we got it to where it was like basically, we wanted his voice to be Harvey's. And then the funny thing is I remember and it's on YouTube if you want to look it up, but he was on a Columbo, of all things, in the 70s, I believe. And in that particular episode, he plays a television star who kills his manager. And he kills his manager by pretending to be a robber at a store he knows she's going to be at. And so he shoots her as a robber. But the voice he used playing the robber.
What do you think?
I think that I had better try and help you.
Would you? Oh, that would be an honor. Detective Lucerne helping me. Wait till I told my wife.
You, hands up. No noise. We still think it was premeditated, don't we?
Oh, I don't know, sir. What do you suppose? And here I thought you were in shock.
You thought I was confused.
You're right.
Perhaps scared.
You're amazing.
If you tell me that one more time, I'm going to kill myself.
Was the voice he kind of ended up doing with Two-Face.
That's great.
And there was no prompting for me, because you don't really want to say to an actor, that thing you did in that episode, do that again. That's just not done. You don't want to do that. But I was hoping that's what he would eventually fall into or find, and he did. And it's a really scary voice. But the thing about him, he was really game. And, when you're recording something and you're just in a booth and all you have is the script and you don't know what visual is going to be ultimately created from what you're doing, it's a little bit more difficult, and you have to have room for experimentation. And Wes Gleason, the voice director, was great about, giving him room to explore, but also, he knew what we wanted, which is we wanted basically the performance William Shatner would have gave had he been cast on the show in 1966, and then I think ultimately, that's kind of what we got. We got it, and what we got was even more. But the thing is, when we got to the ADR or the re-record session where you actually are recording your voice to actual animation, the part when Two-Face is transforming, he really got into it. Like, he was really inspired by that, and he recognized places he could fill in and add more to it, and I think he really enjoys the collaborative nature of acting when you're actually acting and not just, promoting and being, the star. I think he really digs when it's just him and us in a room creating, and he really brought a lot to it. He was great.
Now, of course, you also worked the other 2 big names who were involved in the project were Julie Newmar and Burt Ward. When this all came about, you mentioned that you talked with Adam West. How quickly did it follow that Burt Ward and Julie Newmar were going to be part of this as well?
Well, I think I won't say it was a package deal, but it was assumed by everyone involved that, of course, they'd be involved. They were. I mean, it helped that they were represented by the same people as Adam, I believe. I think that was the case. And so it just wasn't ever a consideration. But we knew if Adam wasn't going to do it, then there was no use going to even pursue the project. I wouldn't have been interested in it. They may have made something, but it wouldn't have been the same thing, and I wouldn't have been interested in it. At the time, I had to do it because of what it was. But if it wasn't, involving Adam, Bert, Julie, I didn't have any interest because I was quite, I had a lot on my plate at that time, and we had to shift some things around just to give us time to make these movies. So, but no, they were on board. I don't know exactly I assume as soon as Adam said yes, they were saying yes, basically.
And can you tell us also what it was like working with the two of them?
Well, they were great. I mean, Bert's great, and he really is. I mean, he says himself that the reason he was hired was because the producers of the show said, "You are Robin," meaning, he's kind of not acting when he plays Robin. He is that excited and that enthusiastic, and he's like that. That is who he is, and everything he came up with as the character is what he is in person. He is Robin. And so I think it was funny was when we first started and he came in, and unlike Adam West, Bert hadn't done a lot of voiceover, at least as far as animation, as far as I knew. And so we just didn't know. It was like, well, but he came in and he was very, comfortable, and it was almost like Robin was kind of his magic trick, because he knew once he started performing the role, we'd be blown away, because literally he starts, and if you close your eyes, you are transported back to 1966. There's not he just sounds to me, he sounds exactly like he did as when I was 6 watching him on TV. I mean, the same enthusiasm, the same inflection. He just, every Holy, it got to be where I was like, oh, we need another Holy here because I want to hear him say it, Like it was just, we were just throwing Holies at him just so we could get him to say, because he just did it so well. It was like, I said, it was like a magic trick, like a magician who has one great magic trick, and that was his magic trick, is being Robin. Like he knows the effect it has on people when he does it, because it just, we all lit up like, oh my gosh, it's him, Like age had not diminished any of that. He's just that guy. And if you ever meet him or have met him, he's that guy.
Boundless enthusiasm.
Yes.
And Julie?
Julie I had met at strangely enough, the first time I met her was at the unveiling of a billboard for Warner Animation. And I don't know, in Burbank, there's the Warner lot has this big billboard that has been basically reserved for animation, Warner Animation, for, God, I want to say since the 90s. And so periodically they change whatever's on that billboard. Well, for years it had been one specific kind of design, and then around 2010, I guess, maybe a little earlier, they changed it to include some of the newer productions. And Brave and the Bold was one of them. Anyway, so I was there for that unveiling, and they had invited Julie, so I met her at that. And then I think later on we cast her as Martha Wayne in Chill of the Night.
You know, Dad? That movie was pretty good after all. Can I be Zora when I grow up?
Absolutely, son. We'll need to get you a bigger sword.
Take that, you wicked tyrant!
Dear.
Oh, Martha, let him play.
Thomas Wayne, when he has nightmares tonight, you can be the one to calm him down.
Okay, that's enough for now, Bruce. We'll start you on fencing lessons when you're older. Say 30.
I'll take that necklace you're wearing, lady.
Leave her alone.
So I'd met her and you know, been in her presence, and she's great. She's old school Hollywood in the best possible way. You know, she's still an Amazon. I mean, she's still really tall, and just very classy lady. That's all I can really say about her. She just was, you know, still quirky, still that. You know, you see that her Catwoman in particular is so nuanced. You know, when you watch the reruns and stuff, the first episode she appears, she's pretty straight Catwoman, you know, kill Batman, death trap, and there isn't the hint of the romance and the attraction that would later play out in her every episode she'd come back for. But you know, boy, she's still very vital and vivacious, and she's, you know, she's classy. That's all I can say.
One thing I was also curious about, I saw an article about this, I forget where, I was somewhere on the internet, I know, and that there was this rumor that at the end of Two-Face versus Batman was going to meet Wonder Woman 77 in the credits. Mm-hmm. Is this true?
I guess I can. Well, I'll put it this way: we're still trying to make that happen. But at one point there was a pass of the script that had Batman meeting Wonder Woman, and you know, they just couldn't work out things with the Lynda Carter, so it didn't happen. And in hindsight, I mean, given how Batman versus Two-Face ended up, and then how we, you know, I think it would have been weird to have that coda and have the in memoriam for Adam.
Right.
So in a way, I'm kind of glad it didn't happen. And also, I think we didn't really need, you know, you don't really need to use Batman 66 to sell a Wonder Woman project. It was just us trying to dovetail from one franchise into the next and kind of connect them and all. You know, it would have been great for fans, but I think as everything, the way things turned out, I think it probably is better it didn't happen that way. But I would still, you know, love for that to happen as far as a Wonder Woman animated, Wonder Woman 77 animated thing.
So there is a possibility, though, that could happen.
You know, I'll put it this way: it's above my pay grade to make that happen. I know that there was a movement on trying to make it happen, and you know, if once things are in agreement, it could happen. But right now, it's not happening.
Right.
As long as if I can be as diplomatic as possible, but yeah,
James,
there were discussions. Mm-hmm.
I want to clarify that when you're talking about that, you're talking about a strictly at this point what would be a Wonder Woman 77 animated film, because Burt Ward at New York Comic Con, as I wrote about and others wrote about and a lot of people wrote about, and he's still talking about the possibility of more Batman 66. You know, you and I talked about that with the other people at the media roundtable. Michael Jelinek weighed in on that. At this point, where we're talking, which for the purposes of John's listeners is, you know, mid-November here, what is that looking like? Is that still a possibility? Is it not a possibility? Is it likely, unlikely? Where can you say?
With the Wonder Woman thing, or the?
I'm talking.
Well, I'll put it this way: the first time I ever heard about the what Bert was talking about was at that event. So I don't know if what he was discussing is anything to do with Warner Animation. Okay. There's often times there's multiple things going on around here that I'm not privy to. All I can speak to is what I'm involved in, and at the moment I'm not involved in anything that Bert's connected to. So, you know, like I said, that doesn't mean there's not something in the works somewhere else, some other project. I seriously doubt it's Batman 66 specific, though.
Got it.
But I don't know.
Now, one of the things that we haven't really talked about yet is the show itself.
Oh, yeah.
You were gracious enough to put together a list for us at 13th Dimension, your 13 favorite episodes. So I don't want you to spoil that list.
Okay.
Because I want folks to read it, and anybody listening can go check it out at the site. But do tell us some of your favorite episodes that have stayed with you all these years.
When you asked me to do that, I had to think about it, because that's like, there's very few episodes I just can't stand. Like, I find some kernel of something to like about it. So I thought about it and went, I tended to like the second half of the episode more, because a lot of times the first part was just set up. Not all the time, because there's a few on the list that I think are first parts.
Well, I was actually intrigued that you actually differentiated between part 1 and part 2, which I thought makes the list even more interesting.
Well, yeah, because I was being literal about it, because I think of them as just one story. I don't think of them as, and I don't even think of them as having the different titles. I just think, that's the second King Tut appearance or something. I don't. So I went, well, if I just had to narrow down 3 two-parters or 13 two-parters, I would miss out on a bunch of stuff. So I went, well, I'm only going to use the half of the show, the episodes I really liked. Or that I liked at the moment I was making the list, because it could change. Like, if I was writing it now, it'd be totally different. But
sure.
I think most of them are from season 1, as I recall, and only 2 are from season 3. Actually, I think 2 from 3 and 2 from season 2 and 2 from season 3, and the rest are all season 1 episodes. But I think season 1 is more like, I always say, the series I watched as a kid, and the way I viewed the whole series was pretty much what season 1 was, meaning I didn't get all the jokes. And season 1, there weren't as many jokes, so it was easy. It's a straighter season. So I don't know. Those just seem more iconic to me. And a lot of them were actual comic book stories. I found out later, and then I'm like, okay, this, to me, that the first season is more reverential to Batman. Then, as far as if you're going to A/B the series to the comic book that existed at the time the show was made, I should say. That's a lot of people go at Batman 66 without any context for when that show was made, what was the source material they were looking at. They'll go back to like the 2 years when Batman may have had a gun, and ignore all the 2, I don't know how many years from the 40s all the way, till the present time where he didn't carry a gun. They try to parse out what makes Batman cool, and I'm like, everything that Batman fans loved about Batman for the 20 years prior to the series, it's in the series. I mean, so I think it's very faithful, apart from maybe some tonal things. But if you read those 40s and 50s stories, they're pretty goofy. So, I mean, and I will say a lot of the adaptations that were on the series were better than the actual comic book story. I mean, the Joker's Wild, Batman's Riled is an adaptation of a Batman story, and I think it's better. I actually enjoy it more. It's cooler. Cesar Romero is really kind of creepy in those first couple of first season episodes.
Yeah.
He's in a lot of the we wouldn't be talking about Batman if they had screwed up that series. If that series had flopped and wasn't as iconic as it was, we wouldn't be even probably talking about Batman. I mean, it'd be like The Shadow. I mean, I love The Shadow, but what is there? The Shadow isn't on everyone's lips still, to this day, like Batman is. And I give that show all the credit. So, but I did ask the question. I got on a rant. I get very militant about the 66, but my list is a few of them are episodes fans have generally disliked, which of course means contrarian that I am. I'm like, there's stuff I like about it. So,
well, name one of those.
Well, I believe the most controversial one is the Dead Ringers, or the second part of The Devil's Finger, the Liberace guest shot.
Of my poor darling, and there I'd be willing to die.
Listen, you bulls, I'm busting out of here, see? And ain't nobody gonna stop me.
And, I hated that as a kid. Hated that episode. Just couldn't stand it. Hated anything that gave Aunt Harriet more than 2 minutes of screen time. And, but after I got into reading a lot of the 50s comics and stuff, and I went, wow, this is really, where, you read the Batman 50s comics and they'd be, these really lame dudes in suits who were, gangsters and stuff, but they weren't really supervillains or anything. And they regularly had, but they always had a motif. So, like the Penny Plunderers, Joe Coyne, where they got the big penny and the. I mean, I equate, Chandel is kind of like the Penny Plunderers. It's like this villain who's really nothing but a gimmick, and it just happens to be, piano playing and, But I thought, when I look at the show now, I watched it just the other night for this, and I'm like, well, there's some cool stuff in it, eh? As you get older, you appreciate the times Aunt Harriet and Alfred got more to do than just say a couple of lines and leave. And by the end of it, when, she finds out Chandel is this, con man, and he sends her the note, and she's actually crying about it, you feel genuinely bad for her. But anyway, the other cool thing is that he has, there's malls all throughout Batman 66, but the Banshees with the killer bagpipes, they're awesome. I mean, they're really cool, and there's a lot of violence in it. I love the bit where he thinks he's got Aunt Harriet and Chandel, or Harry, his evil twin, thinks he's got Alfred and Aunt Harriet in this trunk, and he takes out this machine gun and he just peppers the trunk with bullets. I'm like, for a split second, you're like, oh God, I just saw people get murdered on camera. And it's Alfred and Aunt Harriet, so you kind of hope that's what happened. But no, I'm joking. But, and then, of course, Batman comes out with the Bat Shield. But still, the intent that he was actually going to, that Liberace with a machine gun, that's all I really need to say. But I don't know. It's just such a crazy. It's verging on John Waters. That's the most John Waters Batman episode. I mean, it is beyond campy. I mean, it does a whole. It opens a wormhole into a whole other level of camp. And
that's great.
Now, where do you stand? I got to ask this then, where do you stand on the Minstrel?
The Minstrel, you know what? I think, I just think they had a lot of music villains on there. And if I had to, to me, the Minstrel was probably the least interesting one. Although, on paper, he's the most interesting because he was really smart. He's a genius.
Right.
But, I'd take Chandel and the Siren over Minstrel myself, if you're going to have music-themed villains.
Okay.
Although, roasting Batman over a barbecue spit that was pretty good. And it had Phyllis Diller. You can't, a Phyllis Diller cameo. And it wasn't a window gag. That's what I liked. It was just Phyllis Diller for no reason at all.
I just always thought he got a bad rap because people equated him. It's like, oh, the Archer was just a few weeks ago. Here's another guy in tights. And you're right. On paper, because he's supposed to be the intellectual equal of Batman. I mean, to me, I always wanted to see him get another go.
Yeah, I think. Well, it's hard to say because, I would say people like him were interesting. whenever, especially second season, characters who were really actually smart and interesting kind of got short shrift. He seemed more like a first season villain. Like he seemed more in the Bookworm, which I'm like, why didn't they ever bring Bookworm back? He was awesome. Or, while Falseface I kind of get. I think they did everything they could probably do with Falseface in that one episode, but they covered the gamut. He was pretty creepy. But
he was good.
Yeah, Minstrel, I don't dislike him, but I would say this. I mean, I kind of judge my liking of a villain on whether they're going to get in some of the action. Like I only love Penguin because he's the least likely villain who should be in a fight, and yet he's the first one to jump in and try to, spear someone with an umbrella. Like he doesn't just send his men into the fight. He's like leading them into the charge, and I like when the villains got in the fight. Like the Minstrel just kind of stood and watched. I don't even know if he ever threw a punch or got hit. But that was part of his shtick. He was smart. That's why he didn't fight, because he was actually smart. But I don't know. That episode's not that memorable to me. I remember the climax being a little bit, forgettable.
Yeah.
What was the? I don't know. Anyway, I mean, you don't want to get into the plot of it, but yeah.
I like the Minstrel because I thought I always thought as a kid I used to confuse him and the Archer all the time. But
the Archer sucked. I mean, the Archer was terrible.
With looking at it.
And it was the first season. It was a starting point for the second season, right?
Yeah. Season premiere.
Why would you put that as your first villain? I mean,
because Art Carney was a big star. I guess.
I guess
they were probably going with the star power, and this was, big TV legend at the time. So they were probably thinking that way as opposed to the way we see it. But all these years later, I couldn't stand the Archer, but the Minstrel I like. Now, as far as that goes, though, if you do have, like of all of the villains, which one is the one that you really like the most?
Let's see. Well, when I was a kid, it probably was Joker. And this was before I really knew Joker's history with Batman or that he was from the comics. I mean, I was watching the show before I even read a comic book, so there's something about the Joker. He was just so out there and otherworldly compared to a lot of the other villains. Like, he's in his own universe as far as he's a real freak show. But since, growing up and stuff, I mean, it's a tie. I love the Bookworm just because he's so different, and I don't know, Roddy McDowall really nailed him. But other than that, I'd say King Tut. I mean, King Tut is the one where I can watch his shows as an adult and catch so much more nuance in what he was doing and how it was very, counterculture. Like when you see those King Tut episodes, is Victor Buono kind of riffing on what was going on at the time. Like he's being very hip when he's in those episodes. He's being over the top and stuff, but when you hear his little side comments and stuff, there's very subversive stuff in between the lines and his mutterings and stuff when he's just kind of going off script a little or improvising. And I don't know. He's always watchable now. As an adult, I love watching his episodes.
Yeah, John knows this because I've said this probably a million times on these episodes. But he's the one that was, for me, the biggest change from watching the show as a kid versus watching it as an adult.
Right. Yeah.
His performance is. Yeah. I mean, he actually used to drive me crazy, like fingernails on a blackboard when I was little.
Yeah.
But as an adult, I absolutely scream every time I watch an episode. I think that he was amazing in the part, and memorable too, because the vast majority of people who think of Victor Buono, they think of King Tut, but he was so good at it. And the thing that still blows my mind is that at the time he was 28 years old.
Yeah,
I know.
All these
That's
villains,
freaky.
all these guys in their 50s and 60s, and he was only 28, which still blows my mind.
Yeah.
John, what else did you have?
I'm pretty good because especially I was really curious about the whole Wonder Woman thing, which I thank you for clearing up.
Oh, small fact about Victor Buono. I don't know if you know this, but before Bruce Timm got into animation, he worked at a sub shop, submarine, sub shop. Sold sandwiches.
Yeah.
And one of his regular people that came in and I think he told me it was always around midnight, was Victor Buono. So
oh wow,
it's prophetic. It's like the Batman connection. It's like 6 degrees of separation. But anyway, he told me that story a while ago, and I was like, holy crap, that's cool. But anyway. So Bruce Timm sold Victor Buono submarine sandwiches. Meatball subs, which is another John Waters connection. But anyway.
The idea of John Waters directing a Batman 66 episode, James, I swear.
That Chandel episode is the closest you're going to get, I think. That's pretty John Watersy.
So, James, was there anything else that you wanted to leave us with as far as Batman or the animated films?
No, I mean, you guys, just let me ramble on about my love of the series. So the only thing I will say is the best thing that came about this was being able to, doing the movies was, when Adam passed, I wasn't really, it was a shock, because I literally felt like I'd just seen him only a few months before, because he was here for ADR to finish up the second movie. And so, I was just, I'm still processing it, but at the time I just was like, wow, what? But getting to be on the tribute panel at Comic-Con for him was like a great but very strange full circle moment for me. So I was honored to be able to do that and to be able to talk about what a great person he was. So not to be a downer, but it was cool.
No, it's not a downer at all, and that video is on the It's an extra on the
right
Batman versus Two-Face. So
yeah.
Well, James, I appreciate you joining us tonight. John,
my pleasure.
Well, James, before you go, I mean, in case people wanted to get a hold of you, do you have like a social media presence that people can connect with you?
Not that I'd be comfortable giving out, okay. But I am on Instagram, J Tucker Animator, on Instagram. I'm an infrequent poster there, but the most official stuff, unless you want to see my political leanings and all that stuff, which I don't think anyone should be subject to, that's the best place to know about what I'm doing or where I'm going and all that junk.
Well, that's great.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. And
we'll also be seeing James's piece over at 13th Dimension, right, Dan?
Yes, yeah. That's by the time your listeners are listening to this, they will be able to also go to 13th Dimension. They'll find it. James Tucker's 13 favorite Batman episodes, and I got to tell you, since I had a sneak preview, of course, it's a great list. It's really, and there are some curveballs in there even beyond the Liberace episode.
Yeah. Oh, something different. I mean, let me. This is slightly off topic, but there's a Scooby-Doo Batman thing that I was doing.
So yes, I'm sorry. That could be a whole separate other episode.
Right. I just want to put it out there. It's coming out, I think, in January. There's a lot of 66 nods, like Brave and the Bold had. So I think 66 fans should pick it up just because if they're completists. There's a lot to love in that if you loved 66.
Yeah, and we will definitely be covering a lot of that as we get closer at 13th Dimension for sure.
Yeah.
And that's when I saw that was announced, I was like, that is perfect. I'm so glad that very quickly then since we're our time's almost up, I guess.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that movie?
Oh, well, what can I tell you? Well, yeah. Well, I'll put it this way: it's much more Brave and the Bold than I thought it would be when we started it. So, if you were a fan of Brave and the Bold, it serves that property very well. Like it's not like it. I'm not a huge continuity junkie, but it doesn't violate anything that if you saw that series, it fits right into it. And I think it's a great Scooby movie, too. I mean, if you watch the original Batman Scooby team-ups on Scooby-Doo movies, this one definitely falls, I think it's better, actually, but, that's not a high bar to jump over. But but I love those. I'm not ribbing on them, but and they're extras on the DVD actually. So it's a good deal.
Well, there's one question. Do they acknowledge that they met Batman in the past, or is this like alternate universe?
No, if you watch the episode that they did appear on in the series, it was a alternate universe, so they never really met the Scooby Gang. Okay. So this is their actual meeting. That's right. It was called Batman's Strangest Cases, I think.
Yes.
One of my favorite episodes of the whole series. I love that episode.
I wish we could have done more Bat manga, but anyway, it was. I loved. That was fun. That whole series was fun. That was, every episode was something. It's always like, well, wow, it'd be cool to do this, and then they actually let us do it. It was crazy. But I
would so love to talk to you more about that.
Cool. Yeah. When it comes out, I'm game.
Excellent. Now, did you say that the original movies are going to be part of the DVD with?
That's what I read recently. I read that those would be included as extras. I only know what I read, like anyone else, really. I mean, no one tells me anything. But no, I read that as part of the blurb of what's included. So, which I think is great. I think that's really cool.
That's great.
Very cool.
All right. Well, terrific.
James, thank you once again for being here on this episode of the Batcave podcast.
Oh, cool. My pleasure. This was fun.
And folks, that's going to do it here for this episode. Stay tuned. We're going to be continuing our reviews of the Filmation cartoons from 1968. Dan and I doing that. And we'll be wrapping up. We're down to the final episodes of The Green Hornet over at the Hornet Sting podcast. So until next time, folks, thank you so much for listening. Once again, Dan, James, take care, citizens.
Thanks for coming, James.
Thank you. Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening, chums. I don't have a bat phone, but you can contact the Batcave podcast through its Facebook page, Twitter, email at thebatcavepodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to the podcast via Libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. Or through iTunes. The Batcave podcast is part of a series of pop culture podcasts from the Chronic Rift Network. Find them at chronicrift.com. So until next time, citizens, same bat time, same Batcave podcast.
Like all this investigating is making me hungry.
The most legendary crime fighter.
Batman, what are you doing here?
Will meet his match.
Trap now!
In a mystery-solving mutt.
Nothing scarier than
puppets. Congratulations, you passed the test. We've been aware of your team for some time. Mystery Incorporated, welcome to the Mystery Analysts of Gotham.
Jinkies, Batman needs our help?
A crime alert.
Maybe we should investigate.
Agreed. I move that Mystery Incorporated take the lead on this case.
It looks like we have another mystery on our hands.
We'll have to eat our way out of here.
They're hungry for action.
Jeepers! He's turned into bat villains!
Taking down villains.
After him!
And helping the Dark Knight save the day.
New plan. Let's bash some bad guys.
Let's go.
Paw to the metal!
Scooby, turn left.
Left, got it.
He doesn't know directions.
Duh, he's a dog.
Holy Scooby-Dooby-Doo, Batman!
Scooby-Doo and Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Look for it on DVD and digital.
Bravo! Good show.
Talking animals freak me out.
Tell me about it.